Mr. Chairman.
All right, welcome back from the lunch hour. It's 1 o'clock. This is Legislative Technology, Facilities and Process. I guess Facilities Tech Process, FTP, ironic. Next up at 1 o'clock, we're going to talk about procedures and session issues. Had several members of the public and affiliated groups have expressed some concerns over the past couple of years regarding how the legislature can improve some transparency processes when it comes to our committee meetings. I don't know if these are officially in order, LSO, but first on the list is Mike Lehman. And so, Mr. Lehman, if you'd come forward, talk to us about process, procedural, and session issues that we can fix. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Mike Lehman with the Catholic Diocese of Cheyenne. I became the legislative liaison for the diocese in 2015, and over the course of that time, I've been always amazed at the amount of the work that the legislature is able to do over that short period of time. It is impressive. I'm not sure that it's always healthy, but it is impressive. Another thing that I've learned over the course of that time is that all of us, interest groups, advocacy groups, legislators, we all significantly rely on the principle of subsidiarity. It's very difficult to anticipate potential consequences of even the smallest policy changes, and so we really rely on those voices, those populations that are going to be directly impacted by changes, and those entities that seek to serve those populations. The challenge, though, is that for the average citizen, it's very difficult. As they're raising families, working, doing the typical citizen living, it's very difficult for them to keep pace with the legislature. This last session, I was talking to a lot of different friends, lobbyists for different groups, and legislators. The end of the first week there of the budget session, we were all kind of in the same boat. We have our own constituents who are asking us, what are the sort of priority areas? What are the specific bills we should be paying attention to? And the reality is all of us know at that point, we don't even know what's coming yet. The bills are still coming. It's hard to tell people when we don't know what's really in front of us, what they should be focusing on. And so I did share, so those of you that are members of the Management Council as well, the story of the observation there at the Revenue Committee, trying to get its arms around the property tax bills. And I don't even remember what the number was, but it was significant. And I think Chairman Harshman, in consultation with the committee, did a good job of laying back those bills, because it didn't make a lot of sense to start changing bills or voting them up or down until the committee had a good sense of what all the bills were trying to do. Well, that's kind of a microcosm of what the general public is facing. If the committee's having a challenge trying to do that in a limited amount of time, so is the public. And so kind of had this idea of, would it be possible to do a pre-session filing deadline for bills? Originally, I was thinking for both the general and the budget session, but after visiting a little bit with Director Obrick, and sharing as you go into the general session, as we will be this January, you're gonna have new legislators who are gonna maybe need some more direction on how to file bills. Don't wanna limit that possibility, although I'd still be curious to see if we could maybe move that deadline a little bit forward. And then look at the budget session. I understand the budget session, historically that 2/3 threshold for non-budget items has kind of been the gatekeeper for limiting bills. But then the question is, what happens when the general makeup of the legislature wants to just open that gate as wide as it can? But even with that gatekeeping process there, it still doesn't allow time for the public. So that's kind of the general idea. My thinking is, if we allow the public a little bit more time to be able to read the bills, consider how those changes are going to impact their populations or those entities that serve those populations, provide the legislature with feedback so that they have time, we're going to improve potentially public input without adding any more necessary session days. So that was the concept, and with that, I would stand for any questions.
Questions for Mr. Lehman? I mean, we're going to get into a healthy discussion here, so we'll certainly bring you back up here in a bit as well. But if there's any initial questions, Representative Yun?
Mr. Lehman, thanks, Mr. Chairman, appreciate it. I think it is a little bit of a symptom of two things. So I think you're right that if we forced filing before session, we could do a little more processing on the bills beforehand. However, some of it is just a result of having such short sessions in general, right? We move through it very quickly, and then you don't know which ones you need to look at. And then half of them die immediately, and oh, whoops, I need to look at those other half. So it is a symptom of our process. I'm curious on what your thoughts would be on extending the timeline, the session schedule. So even though we'd have those session days, maybe having shorter weeks where you'd have more time in between weeks to process the next week's bills. So instead of like a 5-day, a 4-day, or a 3-day session week.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Representative Yin, that's a good question. I guess I would have to think about that some more. I don't know that I completely understand how that would affect the overall, but that would be something to look at for sure. Yeah.
Okay, follow up?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the thought would be that we have a limited number of session days, and that's our requirement. And so if we spaced out the session days a little more, would that allow more time for the public to process the bills in between our session days?
Yep. And as long as we're not gavelled in as a full legislature, it doesn't count as a day. So you can have committee meetings. We could do like committee meetings every Monday without, doing a roll call with the entire body. And I mean, and we talked about those, well, probably before your time, 12 years ago or so, that there's just too many bills and not enough time. And we looked at some ways last decade on how to fix. Other questions from Mike? Not. Representative Banks, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I understand the thinking behind this concept as well, and I think it's a problem we face as legislators as well of just the enormity of the bills and getting everything we need to straight on each one. What about the idea I'm going to pose to you and get your thoughts on this? I've heard it floated around, limit the number of bills legislators are allowed to bring or allowed to submit. If we limit that and just limit the bills altogether and give us all more time, would that maybe satisfy your concerns?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Banks, that's been an idea that I have visited with folks about. I don't know. I guess it would be interesting to see the will of the legislature and particular legislators as to the limit. I certainly have seen years where that the number of bills filed by a particular representative or senator, they have no ability to be able to follow them all through. And so there's, I'm sure, political reasons for why they would file particular bills that they probably know aren't going to fall through. And I also understand, Mr. Chairman, there's a strategy for the element of surprise. Like I get that, and people on both sides like it when it works out for them, and they don't like it when it doesn't work out for them. I happen to be, I guess I ride the line between optimism and naivety, but I believe in the process. I think it's good to have time and robust debate. And when we allow our citizens a little bit of time, I think it's going to only help the process. But
Okay. Follow up, you good? Other questions? Not seeing any as of right now.
thank you,
And
Mr.
yeah,
Chairman.
we'll certainly discuss. We're going to hear from everybody and then I think have a robust discussion here. Next up officially is Marissa Carpio from the ESPC. Welcome. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Marissa Carpia. I'm representing the Equality State Policy Center. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization with over 20 coalition organizations in social justice, conservation, and labor pillars, many of those who participate in our legislative process. On behalf of our coalition, I'd like to thank this committee and LSO for the improvements made to our legislative process, especially the live streaming and remote testimony policies that have strengthened our public participation. We've submitted a letter to the committee, which is also available online for anybody who's watching, about concerns from both the public and our coalition members about the lack of clarity around submitting materials like bill drafts and agenda items, the acceptance of public comments, and procedures for last-minute testimony on late additions to meeting agendas, this and last interim. These ambiguities, though important for committee chairman flexibility, can create obstacles in public participation. If recommendations on those procedures have been in fact made to committee chairman, it would be beneficial for the public to see those. We believe if the revised committee chairman handbook is made publicly available on the LSO website, it will be helpful in this regard. I did find a 2007 version by searching, but it's not on that handbooks and policies portion of the page. So we're not asking for policies specifically, just information that has already been shared with committee chairman to also be shared to the public. Thank you, and I now stand for questions.
Questions, committee. Let me double check with LSO. Do we know if the chairman handbook is publicly available? I know the rules, I'm looking up all those pages right now. And we do have the legislative handbook and the rules, but I don't know if we have a chairman's handbook up there, if you know, Director.
Mr. Chairman, we don't, but not because it shouldn't be. It will be, but it was such a mess that needs to be revised. And so I've been working on revising it this interim. But I did look, and there was never anything in there about the deadlines for notice or material anyways. Where I found those, and Tamara as well, some is in Management Council policy, where it's 15-day required notice for the meeting, and the sample rules, 15-day notice for required meeting. And then in our own internal guidelines, we say, we discuss what the best practices are, 15 days for posting of materials, what to do a month out. We've been thinking if the committee wants to take action on this, maybe the best way to do it would be to update our meeting notice template with some language about how LSO will strive to post all meeting materials 15 days prior to the scheduled start of the meeting, but then include some language with failure to do so wouldn't prevent the committee from considering that topic. And then that gives everybody notice of what we're trying to do. And I guess this issue, first, I think that since we've had legislative editors, that position, we're much, much better about posting material way sooner than we used to be. We used to not post material on the website at all. And I mean, within my time here. So we're getting better at that. And a lot of it is, it's just agencies have other duties as well. And when we ask them to get us material, sometimes it doesn't come to us in the most timely fashion. And it's not just agencies. I mean, there's times LSO bill drafts aren't done in that 15-minute timeframe for multitude of reasons, 15-day timeframe. So I think it's a great goal to shoot for and try to be more consistent with, and I think we are more consistent with it. But I think it's something we can improve on and give the public more of an idea of what to expect in that notice too.
Well, we got like 25% of it solved there immediately, and we're working on a lot of the multitude of other issues. Representative Yun.
Mr. Chairman, Director Obrecht, would we be able to put a committee's approved rules on the committee's page? Because I don't even know or remember particularly which committees have specific voting rules over other committees, and having that be on the public webpage, I think would be useful, as well as it would be able to publish, that 15-day part of the sample rules if the committee approve those sample rules.
Yep. So, Mr. Chairman, the sample rules are published in various spots on the website, probably not in the most conspicuous area. And also, it doesn't say anything in the sample rules about when materials should be posted, just 15-day notice for the meeting. When a committee adopts rules that amend the sample rules or are different than the sample rules, that is captured in those minutes of that meeting, but only in those minutes. Like, we don't have a tab that would denote that. And we could put that under like the other resources tab for the committee. I think, IT and some other folks would probably tell me that our tabs are getting a bit crowded there on meetings or on committees, but we could do that. Yeah, I think that answers your question. And like I said, we could make the sample rules more conspicuous too on about committees. I don't know if they're there or not. Anthony, do you know? They're not, so we could put them there. And also in that about committees, we could, Tamara had this idea when we were discussing this earlier of, improving that, our guidelines to attending a committee meeting. Hey, here's what to expect. The material will be posted within 15 days, and and we could take a look at that as well.
We do have the decorum for attending committee meetings, but maybe not some of the processes that people may wish to know go on.
Mr. Chairman, we do have some of those processes, but it could be added to. I mean, it could be updated.
Other questions for Ms. Carpio while I have her? Senator Larson, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think I have a question, I guess, maybe it was just a comment, and maybe I should save that for later. I don't know.
Nope, now's good.
Okay, I would, I'd like the agenda or posting that we're having a meeting at 15 days, but I'm not sure if necessarily the documents need to be in 15 days ahead. I think that's a long ways out. 10 or a week would be plenty, I think.
I think there's something when the legislators get them, I mean, the public should get them. And I know there are times I'm getting things 2 or 3 days before the meeting. And there are times as the chairman, I've gotten things to approve, and it's taken me 3 days to read through them and say, yeah, this is what it should sound like before it goes out to the public. But if there is, when we send materials to the committee members, from what I understand, it goes almost immediately to anybody who's signed up for the listserv that goes out and says, hey, it's now publicly available as well. Is that correct as far as you know, Director?
Yep. Mr. Chairman, as far as I know, that is correct. And I would just say that one thing we're working on right now on this, which would be a good time if we're going to update these participating in committee meetings, we're currently had American Sign Language interpreter interpret those rules for us so we can post that video or those guidelines. So we'll need to redo that. And it's not posted yet. It's still a work in progress.
Other questions for ESPC? Don't go too far, Marissa. Seeing none. Thank you much for being here and hanging with us for a bit. And while we're still taking general public comment, Mr. Laycock.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Committee. I'm Tom Laycock, AARP Wyoming. I'm here today to ask if we can start a conversation regarding frequency of engrossed bill copies. What we're ultimately discussing is that question of, there's an engrossed bill once it becomes introduced and then changes over to the other side of the chamber, but that allows for amendments through committee as well as first read and so on. And what we found is, there'll be a number of times you'll talk to someone perhaps in the lobby and say, here's the bill, what are you working on? Here's what we're working on. And here's what we think the bill does. And then they get back to their desk and look at the introduced copy. Haven't been able to read in the amendments, because there's 35 bills that day. And you get that text up in the gallery that says, that's not what this bill says. You say, well, got to read in the amendments, and here's the process for that. Now, given the fact we have such a large freshman class coming in, this seems like a good time to have the conversation in terms of how we do what we do. The other piece of it is I think this would also be beneficial for getting more public input. When we share bills, it's a difficult thing to share them with our members as well as the public and say, here's what's going on. Oh, by the way, here's what the bill says, but that's not really what the bill means because there have been amendments since then. I very much appreciate what the LSO does. I think they're overworked and underappreciated. And so I know there's some processes that would have to take place or change in order for this to happen. But it's something that, there was a number of folks that expressed some frustration over sort of the lack of participation in our primary election recently. And, sort of a frustration that people were reading, perhaps some campaign propaganda that they received. And I think if you want people to really be a part of that process, I think you need to make it as simple as we can. And perhaps this would be one way to do that. So that said, I'm happy to answer any questions. I did have a quick conversation over the course of the last 3 weeks with other state offices, AARP state offices, and just asked, how long in between amendments and an engrossed copy do you guys get an engrossed copy? And of the 8 states that I talked to, the trend seems to be 24 to 48 hours at most. And so that said, we're probably a little behind the curve there, but I understand we do things a little bit different than perhaps other states do. So happy to answer any questions you might have, but I just think it's a good time for a conversation around it.
So ultimately, I want to make sure I know what you're asking. Like after, say, committee of the whole, it would have a new copy that this is the most up-to-date current version of the bill with the amendments, instead of a bill having like 9 amendments and you having to plug in each one, or if amendment gets divided. So every day, at the end of the day, not only, that's kind of the hope. Instead of before it goes to the chamber, it's after each reading, any amendments, that would become the new bill.
Mr. Chairman, that's, correct.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Senator Case, go ahead.
thanks, Mr. Chairman. That bears some conversation. In our terminology, the engrossed has a particular meaning. It means as it was passed the other house. And so I'm not opposed to what you're saying, that more new copies be available with tracked-in amendments, or we have a software that lets people do that themselves, or there's all sorts of different ways this could be. But when to us, when we look at a bill and it says engrossed, it means something. And that's an important distinction, and I would not want to change that. But I'm happy to explore ways that there can be unofficial versions of bills that have tracked in amendments that have passed. But to just engrossed just actually has a specific meaning, and I wouldn't want to mess with that.
And I think that's fair, but it doesn't matter what we call it necessarily, as long as we have the public informed and understand that a bill has significantly changed. I know when substitute bills come out, it gets real interesting with amendments. And then sometimes you delete all those amendments on second reading, and then you split amendments. I mean, it is tough to follow as a legislator. So as a member of the public trying to watch a bill, I know it gets frustrating. But I'm not sure how to, if we solve it, you'd almost have to like highlight the portions that have been changed. Do we know how other states, I'll ask in a second, but is AARP aware of how other states do
Mr. Chairman,
this?
we have asked the other states if they could help us with, whether there's an off-the-shelf program, exactly how they do that. I haven't received anything back as yet. But Senator Case, I certainly understand your thought. And I'm happy to call it whatever you like, as long as we call it, as long as it's whatever the bill that's actually being discussed in its most current form is available to the public.
Do you have thoughts, director or staff, and what other states do? And if it's technology upgrades, what it might cost? Floor is yours.
Yep. So, Mr. Chairman, this is something that Tom had discussed with me, 2-3 years ago. A while. And so we've been looking at it, thinking about it. Anthony and Jamie have done a study of what other states do. And if you guys remember, during the 21 special session, we did exactly this because we had the staff to incorporate the amendments after each reading into the bills in a PDF format. We just, had more staff than we had bills or work, so we had that capacity to do that. What Anthony and Jamie will tell you is it's not really a technology solution as far as we can tell. It's a process solution. And so we'll get into that a little bit on what that might look like. But really what it looks like is less amendments on less readings. Or a heck of a lot more staff.
Other thoughts, committee? Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When we were reworking the drafting system, and I don't remember how many years ago that was now, somewhere around 10, this was a point of discussion, was trying to find a way at the time to allow for inlining of amendments in an automated way. And at that point in time, there really wasn't a solution available. I still don't think there is a ready-made solution available. I'm very curious what other states do that is more effective or efficient than what we do, because it is a human process that we do based on staff actually doing it manually. So the only solution within our current system would be to add a lot more staff to do that manually much more quickly. There are some process considerations beyond it as well. You need a reference bill that you're amending to. And if you had a constantly updating system and your amendments were being drafted to that system, it's actually harder for staff to draft to that than it is for them to have a baseline bill in the chamber, whether that's the original bill or the engrossed bill, as Senator Case was talking about, and then working from that point forward, building on from an internal logic standpoint. In some ways, I think is, I wouldn't say easier, but easier to track, I guess. At the same time, if we could get to the point where we had software that could do it instead of humans doing it, I think Mr. Laycock's suggestion is spectacular. It would be wonderful if that were just this amendment was adopted, click here, and now, since it was adopted, the newest, freshest build on the website is compiled based on all of that information. It would change all the line numbers. It would change the pagination. It would potentially change referencing. So that gets back to how it might be a challenge to do drafting from that point. But at least having it available for the public, I think, would capture Mr. Laycock's interest, even if we don't do that internally. But again, I think we would need an entirely new and different drafting system to do that, because it doesn't. And really, if any other state is doing that, I'd like to know what they're using, because it would be very challenging. So I agree with the objective, but I don't think, candidly, we're close to being able to pull that off without just hiring an awful lot of additional people to make it happen. And maybe others disagree, but we had this discussion several years ago, and there just wasn't a path to go down.
I mean, I think the difficulty is when you have an amendment that amends an amendment, and Ellis is really good about saying, take this amendment number 1 and add this and delete this, but when you get 3 steps down and then you get to the next reading, I mean, it's tough. I've had to have LSO go through and write, and pen for me on something. And we used to, it's been a decade, we used to call it engrolling, and we didn't have a lot of it, but maybe 5 or 6 bills that were so amended so heavily, not to substitute, but I think eminent domain was one that just had so many amendments, we had to take a day and say, everybody gets a copy of the new fresh bill. Because once it goes to the floor, you can't make a substitute bill at that point. You can just amend and amend and amend. So, and I assume that was a time-intensive, labor-intensive process that a computer doesn't do. It's somebody by hand retyping that entire thing, printing all those copies and sending to us. So again, overall, the will of the committee, we can ask LSO to look, check with NCSL, see if they're better. Are there better drafting systems? Or from your testimony, we don't think there's a computer way to do it. It's just a staff intensive
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think, Jamie and Anthony have looked into this and can discuss it with the committee today on what other states do. But just a high-level view of what they report, of what their report will show is that it's really a procedural change that other states do. And that is limiting amendments on readings. They will engross a bill on second reading or after second reading. And then on third reading, you just vote it up or down. You don't get to amend it again. Another one is committee amendments that pass, standing committee amendments become part of the bill and engrossed for their discussion on their committee of the whole or their first reading of the bill.
Other questions or general thoughts? Go ahead, Senator
Mr. Chairman?
Rothfuss.
Yeah, and that last point was interesting, that they basically reduced their capacity to amend. And at that point, it's a lot easier to do it. That also makes sense. We could probably do that, but I'd be reticent to change the process and reduce access to amendment. I do think, though, this becomes easier 2 years from now with what AI can do with document integration. So maybe I'll sit here in like 2 minutes and see if I can take an amendment and have an AI engine integrate it into a draft for me and see what it reports. I'll do that while we're chatting. But if I can't do it today, rest assured I'll be able to do it in a year.
And Mr. Chairman,
go ahead.
Jamie's got something to report on that too, Senator, that we've looked at that. So, and it's something we're still exploring.
Okay.
So maybe, Mr. Chairman, Jamie and Anthony could give
Yeah.
a discussion on what they've
Maybe
found.
we'll do that, start from the back and work our way back to the beginning. So that's the topic at hand. Any other commentary, Mr. Laycock? Otherwise, we'll jump into some research and then on this issue, and then we're going to kind of go back to Ms. Carpio and Mr. Lehman's concerns as well. So with that, Anthony, do you want the floor?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, and then I'll let Jamie expand on this because he has some counterparts in North Dakota and Maryland that we've spoken to on this issue. And just broadly, what I can say is that it's something that we've continued to look at. It's kind of been an ongoing thing that we have done research on, that we've talked to other states about, specifically those two that I mentioned. I am interested to hear back from Mr. Laycock's contacts in other states, because frankly, what we have found is there aren't a lot of states doing this, at least from our research. So certainly if there are other states out there that are doing this, we definitely want to know about it. But Senator Rothfuss and Director Obrecht really provided the best overview for what we're talking about, is that our current drafting system just really doesn't do it. But we do believe that at some point down the road that AI is potentially an option, but also these other states just have a much simpler amendment process than we do. They have much fewer amendments, it appears, and they're much more restrictive on when their amendments can be brought. And so that certainly simplifies the process as well. But that's really all I have right now, but Jamie can expand a little bit on, he's spoken to some folks, like I said, in North Dakota and Maryland.
Go ahead, Mr. Chapman.
Mr. Chairman, so we talked to North Dakota and Maryland because we had heard that they were basically doing this mini engrossment or whatever in between readings. And probably the clearest example of the first thing they do that's different than us is when a bill is in committee and the committee amends it, when they vote on it, that is the new version of the bill. They don't go to committee of the whole and have committee of the whole adopt it. So what they amend is finalized. So when it goes to the floor, they already have like a mini and gross copy of that bill when it goes to the floor. And for instance, like North Dakota is doing it through track changes. So it's very simple because you're just doing one amendment to the bill, so you can make that change fairly easily. Where you start having the challenges is as you do the readings and you don't have any limitations on the amendments, Especially if you have amendments referring to another amendment all within the same reading. For instance, Maryland will allow you to reference another amendment, but it's not in the same reading. They won't allow that at all. But that's the biggest thing probably is, and this is what Director Obrecht got into, some of the biggest challenges come to a process thing where the process with how you do amendments would need to be modified in a certain way to make it easier. And that's where the biggest limitations come from. As for the AI portion, we had talked to a consultant to help us out with that. And we probably could do 85% of the bills that way. There's probably 10 or 15% of the bills that would be challenging, but those are also the 10 or 15% that you're interested in this process about because of all the amendments that are occurring on those bills. But when you're like sequencing things and referring to amendment within an amendment, if that's adopted, if that's failed, I think Senator Rothfuss alluded to this, the line numbers change. If something gets inserted, the page numbers change. What is the original reference? Is it the new reference now? There's a lot of things on the tagging that you would have to do in that situation.
We wouldn't have any data or statistics on how many standing committee amendments fail on committee of the whole, or an easy way to go back and look. I mean, my belief is it's very few, less than maybe 5% from a committee appropriation. Sometimes we'll have some battles on what they haircut. But it is kind of rare. Do we have any of that?
We were talking about that, and we don't. But it is rare, and usually when it happens, it's because the chairman asks the floor to vote against it because there's something wrong with the amendment, and they'll bring back a second reading amendment to fix it.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator Case.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just kind of want to be a little cautious about all this. First off, I think we like having our committee of the whole. I know we're one of the few states that still have that. But that is, in essence, a second committee. It's not the Senate looking at something. So I think that's an important part of the process. And I wouldn't call a bill ready to be introduced just as it comes out of a committee, especially because our committees have drifted to be a little bit lopsided. I don't know if you've noticed, but they kind of tend to have particular political orientations. And so what comes out of a committee isn't necessarily what the legislature will accept. So I hope we would resist getting rid of committee of the whole. The second thing is, I get that all this could happen, and I think AI could do it and things, but amendments can be very complicated, and a mistake in putting an amendment into a bill will throw everything off going forward and throws everybody off. Our system now holds 2 official copies of the bill as sort of the grid that we're going to work off of with respect to line numbers, with respect to actions taken, with respect to the original text. And if we start evolving to where that's always changing, then we have an issue that if a mistake was made early in the process, we don't have the standard to go back to because it's cumulative. So even if we did this for convenience for the public, I think we'd have to keep our official versions the way we do it now. Hold the bill, it gets engrossed when it leaves. At that time, the amendments are put in a way that is rigorous, just like writing a new bill. I mean, they check everything. The whole moving target thing kind of scares me in terms of keeping track of what actually happened. I think there was one more point I was going to make, but I would just be really cautious about this. And even if we were able to do it for the public, so they're looking at one version of the bill, but we have a system that's based on this rigor to like the gold standard bill that we're following, then the public can't communicate with us, or we don't communicate with the public. What version are you looking at? La, la, la. So I think it's clear that if we have any of these kind of red line bills or tracked-in bills or mock-up bills, that they not be official and that be clear that they're not official. And we have a hard enough time now with the public not knowing what's old language and what's new language. They're always calling us up and saying, why are you changing this when the language has been in there for 50 years, We got to be careful here.
Can I tangent real quick, and I'm not sure if this is an LSO question or it's somewhat my understanding that we are not having committee secretaries anymore in the House, and that our committees will actually be staffed by an LSO employee, either LSO legal or a legislative editor in all standing committee cases. Is that correct?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's correct. That's the plan now, is to staff standing committee meetings with either LSO research personnel or legislative editors.
Because just anecdotally, I know at times where we have had some concerns with a standing committee amendment and a chairman needing to pull it, it's because that was lost in translation between a committee secretary and the LSO draft. Those have been cut down since now they're all online. You can go back and actually watch an amendment being made and understand the committee's intent. So I guess I'm just thinking, would it be easiest to have another bill? I mean, right now on every bill online, it says revisions and resources, introduced, enrolled, fiscal note, digest, summary. Having another one when it passes a committee. And is that solving the problem? It might mitigate it some through one reading, but is that enough to justify the work?
Yeah.
I don't know. But it seems like a lot of work, and I'm not sure the best way to go about it. And I understood all the comments from other states, right? That they don't have certain processes we do as a citizen legislature. But it's almost more incumbent on us as a citizen legislature to ensure that, things are transparent and understandable to the public. Committee, other questions on amending and transparency on members of the public to be able to understand? It just goes, when you have 20-day session, it just is so difficult to ensure those timelines get met. I'm not seeing any motions on how to solve the problem right now. I think we all agree it's been an issue and will continue to be an issue.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with Mr. Laycock that it's confusing. It's confusing for members. A bill that's heavily amended, to be able to figure out what you're doing on that bill and what you're voting on. There's no doubt about it. And I could not agree with Senator Case, Co-Chairman Case more, that this requires absolute caution. When we put out those bills in 2021, I worried about the making errors in those track changes with the amendments. I worried about creating more confusion with those. And really what it comes down to right now is we don't have a technology solution for this. We don't want to change our process for it. And we don't have the staff that we would need to be able to do this in an effective manner. What could potentially happen is allowing the presiding officer or a vote of the body to request a bill to be in what we call enrolling, and we're in a PDF format, and we'd have to use that sparingly and it would only be available if, staff resources were available to do it. Now it would need to be checked by an attorney, but it certainly wouldn't need to be done by an attorney. And we still do this for all bills that are amended in the second house and that are then a joint conference committee is reporting on. We produce an enrolled version at that point in time for the joint conference committees. It's not a public version of the bill. I mean, it's literally cut and paste with scissors and with colored pencils, and as we track in the amendments. You could do that in a PDF format now fairly easily, but we couldn't do it for each bill. There's just no way with the current staff.
There you have it, committee. I mean, we've looked at other ways. It takes a constitutional amendment to change the number of days we meet. And so we have talked about 3 days a week and expanding the session, through the end of March, or having every Monday off to just be committee meeting days and perhaps slow it down. But unless people are pulling all-nighters, which we haven't asked quite yet, except for some budget folks. I'm not sure the latest our LSO staff has been here, but it's been 11 sometimes when we've been here working, so.
And Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
a thing for the committee to remember too is you could do that. You could meet 3 days a week, but are you then impacting the ability to have a citizen legislature?
That's why the citizens need good government groups to inform and educate them on the legislative process and how it's working every step of the way, alongside legislators who are doing the same for their constituents. But it's a high learning curve for legislators, for the public. And I think we're all familiar with the turnover each biennium has been far exceeded the past what the turnover was. And so trying to get new legislators to learn the process. I don't even know if many remember the process in the House 6 years ago with the number that are coming in, how we did things before COVID. So it is just difficult. But I'm not sure if it's more research people, more public information. If we looked at that, expanding. We've done hotlines, we've done an email directly to legislators. Do you get public calling in just the legislative service office and saying, explain to me this bill? And when they do that, where does it go? If you just have a random member of the public saying, I need to understand where this bill on this issue is, do you say contact your legislator? Do you say, does it go to Mariana or Anthony?
So, Mr. Chairman, just so I'm clear, so someone calls in and says, where is House Bill 10 in the process?
And they probably just say, I have heard this issue in the newspaper,
Right.
or heard about it on a social media post. It deals with this issue. There might be 4 bills like that, right? What does happen when a member of the public says, I don't understand where this bill is. I've got conflicting information from my legislator, right? Because I've had to tell people, no, you're incorrect. We've amended that out. I didn't do that, right? Because some of these groups are pushing narratives now too. Where do you send just a random member of the public who calls in for factual information?
So, Mr. Chairman, what we would do is try to help that person to the greatest extent we could, directing them to the resources that are available on that bill online. But what we wouldn't do is if they said, hey, I heard this, lowered my property tax when it was introduced by 50%, and now it only reduces it by 10%. We would not offer any sort of guidance on that. We would just point them towards the amendments, and they would need to figure that out on their own.
Any other thoughts on this issue, committee? Representative Yin?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I do like the idea of maybe just for specific bills, we see if there's staff capacity to hand and roll, because the alternative, and I've done this in the past, and I know other members have done this in the past, is that they'll just do it themselves, and then they'll send it out to the body. And that doesn't help the public either. At that point, it only helps the body. But even then, you have to trust that the member who did it is doing it properly when they're trying to explain it on the stand. So it's tough. And it's tough because we are resource limited, and we are resource limited for a reason. But maybe for now, that is the answer. We just make sure that we can ask staff that we have the ability to do it if they have the process time to do it.
Okay.
And I would say, Mr. Chairman, that I'm not adverse to doing that, but it would need to be just like a standing, or just like a substitute bill. Any member couldn't request it. We would get overloaded then. It would need to come from the presiding officer, or potentially from presiding officer, majority or minority floor leaders. And we would do that for them. And then it would also be a staff capacity thing where, that would be on the hierarchy of things to get done, pretty close to the bottom, I would guess. So, but we're happy, and we already do that in certain limited circumstances, we don't then put it on the website, mainly for fear of that we made a mistake or of creating confusion.
Does that need to be potential rule draft to discuss? I guess if a motion's made here, we could discuss that type of a rule change, or the chambers could certainly bring it up.
Or Mr. Chairman, it would probably, this sort of thing right now, with this scope, would probably be really appropriate for management council policy, even if it, didn't carry the force and effect of an actual rule. If we had a policy we could point to, that would probably be the best way to handle it.
Would you need a motion from this committee to encourage that to be brought to management council, or?
That would be great. Some sort of motion, and then I can work on some draft language for a policy.
And so for newer committee members, we have had 10 or 12 in my tenure contentious bills that had lots of amendments. Each day they got more confusing, amendments on amendments. And having LSO just take a day to rewrite them so people could understand them, both legislators and the public, was helpful. But it took an extra day of someone's time for, hours. So a motion to that effect, I'd certainly entertain it if anyone would like to make it.
And Mr. Chairman, I'll make that motion.
Okay. Is there a second? I'm not seeing one. So we'll just move. Second by Rothfuss. All right. So any other public
Chairman?
comment on? Yep. Go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
I'll second it for discussion, but I did have a concern, which is a concern I commonly have. I'm never excited about granting a right to a member of leadership, even though I am a member of leadership, that isn't in any way granted to a member of the rank and file. We are all legislators, and we all technically have equal standing constitutionally, and then we give ourselves special privileges to run the operation of the system. It is not a fully equitable system from a leadership to member standpoint, and I'm not sure we want to add on to the privileges of leadership when we're not giving those to a new member that's a freshman. And I realize that individual could then go and ask that particular leader, but plenty of times the leaders would just say no. And that then means that you have a system that once again provides effectively favoritism towards those that have been around a long time as opposed to those with the best ideas. So and I'm not saying we don't do this elsewhere. I'm just always reticent to build new rules that lead to leaders having more privileges. At the same time, I totally understand that we just don't have the capacity to do this. So the way it's done right now is that anybody would have a right to ask, and you probably wouldn't get it unless somebody had free time. And I'm fine with that, honestly. So the de facto, this is how it is. Nobody's forbidden from asking for an enrolled piece of legislation if they can provide a good justification, talking through people, building up sponsorship, going to staff and saying this is really important, going to the director and saying this is really important. Judgment comes into play, but it doesn't screen who is or is not allowed to ask that question. So I don't want to see that rule, honestly, is where I'm at right now. But I'm open to further conversation. Maybe someone can change my mind on it. That's my initial hesitation.
Well, I know I've asked sometimes, hey, and LSO's nicely been like, we don't have time, and if we do it for you, we have to do it for everyone. But when it has been done, I think it's been at the direction, of the leader of the chamber, and some kind of public announcement that I remember is, this bill has gotten complicated, we're gonna ask LSO to go do this. And so while it hasn't been an expressly written right, it's just always been perfunctory kind of how these things work. But I can imagine things have changed now. If one person can do it, then other people should be asked. And I know a lot of people have their interns do it. But then you have 8 interns doing the same thing, and it gets a little odd when one intern could be doing it. And I don't know if that's a job for the intern pool or not when it's complicated technical language. But any thoughts on that, Director? I know you know how it used to work, and it was kind of when we all perhaps, I shouldn't say respected the office more, but it seemed to be what am I trying to say? Trying to be nice about it, but there used to be a little more, everybody fell in line, and if the speaker, the president said this, we did it, and nobody openly challenged or demanded their own treatment. We're in a different kind of world now. So do you think it needs to be a rule? Do you think it would just happen organically and the leader of the body would direct LSO to do it in cases where there was need without us having to grant that in writing?
Mr. Chairman, as director, without any sort of clear guidance, I agree with the senator. Anyone has the capacity to ask. I will tell you this, that even if we had the ability at the time, I would generally say no. And here's why. Because I don't know if we would have the ability and the time to do it for the next person who asked. And then if I can't give that same level of treatment, of staffing treatment to everyone, I don't think anyone should be able to get it. And I was just trying to come up with some sort of helpful process that wouldn't overstrain us and that would have some equitability in it. But and I fully agree that it's not. So, but I don't know what else to do without finding 10 more legislative editors who could help us with this process during the session.
Senator Larson, thoughts?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Maybe it should go to the body and ask the body if they think that it needs to be done, and maybe that should be the process. If the body thinks it needs to be done, it probably needs to be done. But at least you'd have a majority saying so, and maybe the majority said, no, we don't have time.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Case.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think any member could make a motion for that right now. Could kind of see where that goes. So I think that does exist. I think the whole concept is a little bit potentially burdensome if we, if we put a lot of effort into this with our staff. And I'm scared to death to have interns do it. Nothing against interns; they're fabulous, but a lot of times these are pretty sensitive to track an amendment in, and I just don't see this going anywhere. I really, really do think that AI could provide a way through this, and more faster than we think. And maybe it's already happening, where a member of the public can say, take an amendment, click on it, take the bill, click on it, and say, track the amendment in, and it would generate something for that person. It has no officiality at all. It would just help that person educationally. We could use the same tool as our members, and click on it and say generate it with all the amendments in. But you can't maintain, in that environment, you couldn't maintain things like line numbers, which have critical importance to the ledger bill that we start with. But I think that's really the solution, and those would be unofficial generated copies. And I bet we could almost do that now without wasting any staff time, and making that possible within our system.
Senator Larson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I have to shoot back at Senator Case. I've been here quite a while, and I don't know if I could bring that up as a motion. Maybe it should be in the Senate and House rules that can be brought up. I mean, if you don't know, you don't know.
That as for a vote of the body, there be a rule and say any member can request, and then the body can vote on whether or not to delay a bill and enroll it. I don't know if that's an official term or for us, but I mean, that seems probably about as fair as and perfunctory, because really the danger is, and I'll go back to, what I consider the good old days when I came in, we had 19 attorneys in the House out of 60 members, right? I mean, people could explain this and say, oh, these amendments, they dovetail like this. I mean, I think we have 2 in the coming session in the House and 2 in the Senate. And so it's a lot more, it's just complicated stuff. Laws are getting more complicated. And we move fast, and it just concerns me if people aren't understanding how these amendments fit together and they vote on something wrong, it's problematic. And so we do need to ensure with the speed that our members, especially so many new members, are keeping up and understanding how everything overlays and fits together and affects. And I don't know the right process. I do think AI is probably the right way to go. And I don't know if like the Capital Club or some other independent group would say, we're going to get together and have this kind of tool and have a, you know, a member selected each day, and their work is going to be to have kind of up-to-date, fresh copies with this technology available, if it does need to be a group outside of the government producing it. So all those thoughts to throw in the mix. Representative Yin, thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Yeah, I think a tool provided by the public is something that the public could definitely do. You know, we as government just happen to have a really nice website because we put a lot of work into it, and I get the asking for new features like ensuring that we have enrolled stuff for the public, but this is somewhere that the public could help, right? You could make a tool that automatically takes in the PDFs from the legislative website and runs them through an AI prompt and spits out a new PDF, and that could be something that the public easily sets up if they're willing to pay for it. Could it be something that we do as well? Sure. And it might be something I would do anyways if it was a big bill. So one that keeps sticking out at me is the Gaming Commission. We had like a substitute bill from committee, and then we had 3 amendments on second reading, and then 8 on third reading. And so with that, I think I will withdraw my motion if it's okay with the second, because I almost forgot that we're in the middle of a motion.
Is that okay with the second?
It's okay.
Okay. So no current motions on the table. Anyone else have other motions or thoughts? Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will say that Senator Larson's idea of providing a motion to the body, it's equitable. I think it runs into some of the problems that Senator Case was talking about, but it solves the equal access problem. From a workload standpoint, if it required that you lay it back for a day as part of that motion, basically, we're laying this back for a full additional day and ask that it be enrolled. That might be okay. I'd worry about it getting abused too. I mean, that's definitely fair from the access standpoint. I like the access side. I can see that starting off with 1 or 2 a year, and then we've got 30 of those motions because everybody wants their bill enrolled. I don't know how that ends up playing out. I don't know how we keep a good handle on that, but at least, I appreciate Senator Larson's suggestion from the equity standpoint and ensuring that all members would have equal access to an issue like that.
I think we'll take that forward, and if Management Council needs to talk about it or have an actual rule, or if it's organic from the floor, I would assume any motion made by the floor of the body, LSO would comply with. So backtracking, Mr. Laycock, I mean, is that maybe not the answer you're looking for, but we are aware of the concern. I think LSO is aware of the concern. In the current citizen legislative process, we are not sure how to solve the concern as the government, and would look back to you for, if there are other ways, either in the private sector or in your spheres, that to help members of the public. I think it's incumbent on us as legislators to help our colleagues be up to speed and understand how to read legislation and track amendments. But that extra step of that public interface, we're going to need some help with. So if you'd also take that back to Capital Club or other membership organizations and say, hey, how can we help with this and help the public? It's on all of us. Moving back, Ms. Carpio, we're going to put some stuff on the website, encourage the work on access. I don't know, after hearing the discussion, other things, have you had further thoughts? And we're always open to suggestions on specific proposals. I think we're all aware, we know what the issues are, and we talk about them. We're just in a citizen legislative world with limited staff resources and government money, trying to do what we can with what we got. And then Mr. Lehman, we all share the concern. It just moves fast. And I don't know if we got all of your concerns answered today either or not, or any specific things that you want to, we let you go first after hearing everything else. You're welcome to take the mic again and encourage us to pursue a direction or further clarify after some of the comments you heard where you think we should put in some more efforts and research. We'd be happy to work on that. Thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity, I guess, to throw out one last effort to lobby just for the idea of a pre-session filing deadline. You're all aware of this, but just to sort of spell it out, like I mentioned, you have your constituents asking what are those priorities in that session. You're looking, like I said, that Friday end of the session, and you don't know all the bills that are ahead of you. And then Monday, you realize that bill that died last week actually was a priority. And maybe a bill that's already worked its way through the process is a bill that is one that probably needs amended in order to not negatively affect a certain part of the population. So that's sort of the idea there. I also recognize the need for flexibility. The intent is in no way to hamstring the legislature. So I think it would be very reasonable to find, or allow for exceptions, whether that's asking for, and I know this kind of goes against what Senator Rothfuss just shared his concern, but to go to chair committees to sign off, to create an avenue to where the legislature could not bring bills as they deem necessary. So, yeah, so I appreciate the opportunity for that.
I mean, I think there's other ways, more of a carrot than a stick approach. If you get a bill in by a certain date that's on the website, I mean, it has a greater chance of being heard and talked about and passed. There's a lot of bills that I introduced that last week that haven't been well thought out, that have been drafted as well as possible by LSO, but I always look at the bill number of when it was asked for, and you can usually determine if it was asked for in June or July or last week, and just, some harebrained idea that they haven't talked to anybody and they bring, and they tend not to get very far through the process without a couple of, key legislators' names on them. So I do think there should be more incentive if you get whatever you want to bring to session, and it's the first top 50 numbers. I don't know how you mandate that gets priority, but I would hope that the leadership of both bodies say, this member did everything right. They got co-sponsors, they got this bill introduced in the hopper public ahead of time, and it should be, I don't know how you mandate that they're introduced in the first 2 days or 3 days, but if we would encourage our colleagues to do that, I think it would be beneficial. And there should be some reward for people who have asked for a draft for 6 months earlier, got the research, got their people lined up, instead of some of the wild ideas we get the last week. And I understand with new members, it's tough. They don't know the process. They have this idea, they have to talk to some people, and then they throw out a bill idea. Some of that should be weeded through organically, I think, on just, ideas that have been worked on tend to fare better. Senator Larson, jump on in.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I want to go back to the topic we were on, the enrolled bills. So at some point, I'd like to go back.
Okay, let me double check if there's any other responses or thoughts on Mr. Lehman's comments. Senator Rothfuss.
Mr. Chairman, a few thoughts. I think what Mr. Lehman's aspiring towards is a good aspiration to try and get as many bills out there ahead of time as possible, have as much lead time. And part of that does come down to how we process bills. And this is something we could contemplate. I actually talked to Director Obrecht about this several months ago. If there were a way for us to get bills up a few different times a year posted, so think some committee bills or some legislation that legislators worked on early in the year, getting those out there, having a few cycles of bill approval instead of the final cycle ahead of session where we begin to make the machine work, getting it started a little bit earlier. That might help, and that might lead to more time for some bills that need more discussion potentially to be released earlier, as well as to maybe load balance a little bit for staff. So that's one thing that we could contemplate. Getting to the bill limits, we do have bill limits in the Senate for both sessions. We've got 7 bills in a general session as the individual limit. We've got 3 bills in a budget session as the individual limit. And that's a chamber rule. So the House could contemplate that. But honestly, there's always been a lot of discussion about it being appropriate for the Senate we're supposed to be more methodical and thoughtful and take more time to talk about things. I don't know whether we always are, but we're supposed to. And then the House is supposed to be this wonderful free-for-all where anything goes. And if you want to run 100 bills, good luck to you, but you get to. And I honestly don't know if we want to work against that tradition, because sometimes there's importance to that last minute bill. It becomes a key bill for the legislative session that comes out of a conversation in the hallway the night before the bill filing deadline. We know that happens, and I've filed and passed bills after the deadline by suspending rules. So there's always something in the legislature. But at the same time, I do think trying to find ways to ensure, and we don't necessarily have this, that bills are posted earlier and finalized earlier through our internal process. So where there is no resistance, they're up as quickly as possible. And maybe that's a matter of discussion for the Management Council, where we start looking internally at maybe a couple of bill review cycles or something along those lines. So I guess I'd ask Director Obrecht, this isn't the first time we've had this conversation, and I don't know if you've had any additional thoughts about how that might be addressable, to maybe have a couple of bill release timelines and have our legislative session bill list up even months earlier than it is right now, so that we can get information out there earlier.
And I do think it's maybe the most egregious issues when bills come in late is when they don't have fiscal notes, and they're going to cost, a 6, 7, 8 digit number, and you have the fiscal note is not determinable. And that's difficult, right, to vote on. And sometimes we get that within a week, but in a budget session, if they spring it on you last minute, you don't get the fiscal note in the first chamber of the body. Where my issues have always kind of come on not getting bill drafts out is I have to wait on co-sponsors. I mean, I want to give all my co-sponsors a decent enough time, and more on the co-sponsor thing, people don't say no, they just don't say yes. And so you're kind of waiting to see if they'll respond, and you email them and you wait a week. And I think everybody has that going on. I got emails from LSO every year saying, get them out. We know you have them, we know they're ready, but a lot of us are just waiting on co-sponsors. So if it was a way to make a bill draft public earlier and have co-sponsors sign on after the fact, in the old days, we had a process where you can have more than 10 co-sponsors, and that was because of postcards. That went out the window about 3 years ago, and now we have legislators getting 30 people on their bills. So I don't think we're putting that horse back in the barn. So the question is, I think that would be something we could do. I mean, get it up and allow people to co-sponsor it after the fact. I think you'd get 100 bills 3 weeks earlier, because everybody's just waiting around for co-sponsors in December. Thoughts on that as well? There's 2 good questions for you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'll just note that's a good idea. I think that's a nice one.
Hey, let the record show Senator Rothfuss says I have a good idea. It only took 15 years to get it. Go ahead, Director Obrecht.
Mr. Chairman and Senator, I guess first to the point of co-sponsors, that's right. Folks wait a long, long time for co-sponsors. And in fact, prior to a general session, you can't get co-sponsors until you know who's coming back to the legislature. So you couldn't do it before the general election results are certified. I have concern with numbering a bill and then adding co-sponsors after it. First, it essentially be creating a different version of an introduced bill. There may be places that do it. There certainly is ways to overcome that, but I do have a little bit of concern with that. But it does create every year more and more delay in getting bills numbered, is waiting for co-sponsors. The other big issue on timing is the fiscal note process, is we don't ramp that up until November. So you can't put a bill out without a fiscal note. And if we started the process in 2 tranches or whatever, our staff would need to go away from their committee work, our fiscal staff and the other folks who help out with that process, the fiscal note process, to start working on that earlier. And also agencies then would need to have their folks start on that earlier. So those are the 2 big, in my mind, issues with getting bills that are already out earlier.
Because sometimes I don't get bills until I get fiscal notes, and then I'll go out for co-sponsors. And I mean, I could have it done 2 months earlier if I wasn't waiting on both the fiscal note and the co-sponsors.
That's right.
But you think those are both things that, under our rules, change the bill? Adding a co-sponsor is not a substantive change. I think co-sponsors used to be a big deal, and the last 2 sessions I've been, I don't know if they make any difference to anybody anymore, besides everybody wanting their name on, a gun bill or something. That's a slam dunk.
It's not a substantive change, but Mr. Chairman, for our bill processing folks, they know that once that bill's numbered and on the website, they're done with it and now we'll have, oh, hey, I want this guy, and then call 2 days later, no, he's off, I want this guy on there now, I mean, co-sponsors, I agree with you that there's, I would hate to open up that issue if we didn't have to. And then you're right, though, you can't send it out for co-sponsors until you get a fiscal note. And you can't have a bill, you can't approve a bill either, even if you don't want co-sponsors, until the fiscal note's done on it.
Just seems like there's a whole lot of time savings we could find in there with the right way to do it correctly. And I don't know if there's a way electronically to add yourself as a co-sponsor without it going back through bill processing and put the names on when it went to the other body. But we could explore that. And I do think that, because and I hear it all the time, well, I know this bill is out there somewhere. Someone just hasn't introduced it, or I've seen it. And people I ask, they're just waiting on co-sponsors.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah,
Just
Mr. Lehman.
a question of how the process works. Is gathering co-sponsors, that's something that's necessarily done during the session, or is it something that could be done digitally?
Both now. Historically, it was postcards when I started, and you had to wait, and LSO sent out full stamped. I mean, it cost a lot of money. Now it's all electronic. There's just a date when you think you have enough, you hit submit, and it goes in. Senator Rothfuss, I think
Thank you, Mr.
Senator
Chairman.
Case had a question.
On the Case vanished for a second. I think he's coming back. Oh, there he is. Actually, I'll defer to Senator Case now that he's back because he had his hand up before I did.
Okay, Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Turn your camera off, Senator Case. We lost you again.
Turn my camera off. Can you hear me?
Yep, now I think so.
This thing is bullshit today. All right, I hope you didn't hear my song.
We did. Go ahead and continue.
Sorry about that. Can we still, is there an electronic version of being able to sign the jackets so you could get on the engrossed bill? Because I used to have that.
From what I understand now, you have to sign the jacket. Is there any electronic way to get on to a bill jacket when it goes to the other body is the question.
Mr. Chairman, all they need to do is.
Thank you.
Is tell bill processing, send an email, say, I want to be included when that bill gets engrossed as a co-sponsor. And I think that Sherry also will take co-sponsor before it's numbered and introduced via email as well, not just through the extranet. One thing to consider is get rid of co-sponsors. Just have one co-sponsor in the other house.
It's a great idea. I'm with you.
I think it is a great idea. As soon as you
I think
have,
it's good.
go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Yeah, just to echo, that's a spectacular idea. That would look great. So I'm on board with that one. But my question, Mr. Chairman, is, or getting back to the fiscal note, once again, I totally understand this is the process, and I understand why you would, if you're doing co-sponsors, you would want your co-sponsors to understand the fiscal note, and you've got this process. But the reality is the serial path that it ends up taking holds back posting a bill from getting thoughtful public comment by, in some cases, literally months. I recall a bill that Representative Connolly ran a few years ago where we had the bill drafted months before the legislative session. And we wanted to get a lot of dialogue around it. It was not a committee bill, so there wasn't a good vehicle for dialogue. And the bill didn't end up really getting posted until a few days before the session because it was complicated enough that the fiscal note was challenging. And I think it was even delayed being worked on the fiscal note. So it wasn't as much a matter of sponsors in that case, which weren't that challenging to get in line, but the fiscal note side. So the purpose of the bill, which to a large degree was to start a discussion, and maybe it wasn't a good year to pass it, but let's get the discussion going. That never happened because it wasn't a finished bill. It wasn't publishable. So there's an intrinsic value as a legislator to having the bill posted months ahead of time often, and to get good feedback and to get people to think about it and send emails to you and weigh in. And so we're sort of delaying that aspect, the public engagement aspect that Mr. Lehman's talking about, because our internal government process, particularly in engaging the agencies, delays it further. So I think in particular, we need to find a way around that fiscal note process so that we're not delaying by weeks or months a piece of legislation from being posted online that is looking for the dialogue and the feedback. And I don't know if there's any good ideas for that. I do understand that the agencies really don't like doing fiscal notes because it takes a tremendous amount of their time. We have hundreds of bills, and they know as they're looking at bills doing fiscal notes for them a lot of the time, this bill doesn't stand a chance in hell. It probably won't even be introduced, and I'm doing a fiscal note for it. I'm going to spend 3 hours of work doing a fiscal note for a bill that may not see the light of day. That is a challenge. I don't know what the solution there is, but there's a lot to be looked at on the fiscal note process for how it changes the efficiency of our communications with the public, as well as how much time it takes to actually get that done. I don't know if anyone has any ideas on how we can do that, but going back to Director Obrecht, is there a way that we can have another week a year in the middle of the year or something like that, some other fiscal note week to try and get that done a little bit earlier?
Go ahead, Director Obrecht.
Chairman and Senator, yeah, I mean, sure, we could explore that. There's no doubt about it. And I also just want to point out for everyone that this isn't all about fiscal notes or co-sponsors either. A lot of it is workload priority for our legal staff. You can get an individual bill draft request in early. There'll be work done on it, but then committee bills come in, and those need to be finalized first under Management Council policy and our direction. We finish those first, get those bills out, write summaries on them, get the fiscal note done. And you know, so there's a lot of reasons why somebody's individual bill might not be ready. But I know this, a month out before every session and then every week until session, I send every legislator an email imploring them to please get their bills introduced because we don't have enough bills introduced yet. So This is a broad spectrum problem within our legislative process. Fiscal notes is one of it. Prioritization of work between individual and committee bills is another one of it. Co-sponsors, waiting around for co-sponsors is one. And then I think legislators trying to get everything else wrapped up back home so they can get down here and focus on the legislature is another aspect of it too. So anyways, I just don't think there's a lot of really simple solutions for this.
But truly, legislators who want their bills to get through want it to be out there in the public. And I think we need to just encourage new members to understand the quicker it's out there, the better discussions and the higher likelihood it has. Representative Yin.
Mr. Chairman, just to circle back to your earlier comments, my harebrained schemes are always great and they should always be drafted. But my question to Director Obrecht is, do you know, are there states where they have a filing deadline before the session? Has it been looked at on what other states do?
Do you happen to know, Mr. Lehman or Ross Calasso, if they know?
Mr. Chairman, I don't, but I would highly doubt it, mainly because in a longer session, so much more committee work is done during the session. I mean, most of the, committee bills are actually drafted during a session in Colorado because they meet for 5 months, and that's when they're doing their legislative work.
All right, any directives then, committee? I mean, I do think there's got to be a way, either the carrot or stick approach to get through fiscal notes or co-sponsors, to be able to put something on the website, awaiting co-sponsorship at a legislator's choosing, that we have to be able to technologically be able to make that happen, Director.
Just one other thing that I would mention about trying to back up from the fiscal note process. It's not just hey, we're getting close to session, and so, we're going to start the fiscal note process. It's also getting that last Craig update of what our revenue picture is going to look like that limits us on the fiscal note. And I didn't just come up with that, somebody texted me. So, Wilmarth did. So, Mr. Chairman, another thing to explore potentially is, we put committee draft bills on the website. It's included in material. There wouldn't be any sort of reason we couldn't put a legislator draft bill on the website without a fiscal note, with all due precaution, and explanation that this is draft only and doesn't include a fiscal note and is likely to change before introduction.
So I guess committee, the question, go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Mr. Chairman, I think that would be useful. I mean, what I was going to request were solutions that would get us to where I could post a bill in June as just an arbitrary date or any date during the year, and would have the capacity to have that publicly available in draft form without a fiscal note, without co-sponsors. And I think that's a possible solution. So maybe doing some work internally to figure out what the best approach to that would be, so that we can have better access earlier to bill drafts that we want the public to look at and understand.
So are there any motions to be made or asks of Management Council we want to put forward to them to, put on their agenda, I guess is the ultimate question. You'd probably be looking for a motion from this committee, Director, if we wanted to pursue that this upcoming year, which seems a good time before the general session. If there are ways to streamline the process with so many new members, you start teaching them a new process now, it solves a lot of issues going forward. But I don't know if anybody wants to throw out a motion or just have a motion for discussion about possibilities and for LSO to look at what kind of technological possibilities there may be to post bills in the hopper that are ready to go, that are waiting on either co-sponsors, fiscal notes. Do you want that in a motion form? Or can I just nicely ask you as a member of Management Council to do that for us?
Mr. Chairman, I think I understand the select committee's desire there, and we can research and give you some options on it.
Okay. That seem fair, committee, in this regard? I'm seeing heads nod. Okay. Senator, let me check. Senator Larson, you want to go back to the other, anything else for Mr. Lehman while I have him? Seeing none. Thanks, Mike. We're coming back up at second time as a charm. Okay, moving back, Senator Larson, you wanted to bring up another idea?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we bring forward a rule draft to Management Council concerning enrolled, asking for an enrolled bill to be enrolled, I guess, you want to say that. And takes any member can do that. It takes a 2/3 vote to get that passed on.
You thinking a joint rule or a rule for each body?
I don't know if it matters, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sure it does.
A joint
I don't-
rule would be great.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion? Seconded by, yeah, Bob Banks. Okay, discussion on the motion. Senator Rothfuss, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I don't think it should be a joint rule. I think it should be two separate rules. That would be my recommendation, is that each chamber would be able to govern itself on that, because there's no need for overlap between the two. To get something enrolled, it would be in the chamber, it would be in the control of the chamber. So that would be my recommendation as a potential proposed friendly amendment. Second point is we don't usually go to 2/3 on things unless there's a heavy reason, like suspension of rules. So at that point, I literally could already do anything I wanted with a 2/3 vote because I'm suspending rules. So I don't need anything in the books that gives me a 2/3 vote. I can run the show with 2/3. So my other recommendation, if we want to have it as a rule, would be that it be a simple majority of the chamber to pass it, and by anyone's motion. If we want to go that route, I think that is the appropriate way to structure it parliamentarily so that it accomplishes the objective.
Those both friendly, Senator Larson?
Mr. Chairman, they are. I like the good advice. I was just trying to make it a little bit higher bar, that because I know we all have concerns that there'll be a lot of these requests.
And Mr. Chairman,
Senator Case, go ahead.
I don't think there's anything wrong with this. I definitely agree with Senator Rothfuss that it should be just a simple majority. I'm interested perhaps in the LSO's take, but I don't see where this is prohibited now. And the Masons talks about there being all sorts of different types of motions, more than they can even discuss, but I don't see where it's prohibited now, but having an argument about that, we could make it a rule.
Is there, comments, Director? I don't think there's anything in Masons that talks about something like this, but.
Mr. Chairman,
Yep, go ahead. You've also froze, Senator Larson. With that, Director, go ahead. The floor can be yours.
Mr. Chairman, no, there's nothing that would prohibit this motion to be made from the floor. And, the body's got the authority to entertain any motion that's for the good of the body and within an area that the legislature can act upon.
The question is, but some people know they could do it, and other people have no idea this exists. At least by putting it in the rules, everybody would be aware, if they've read the rules, that this is a motion that could be asked for, and they could ask questions by it, which I guess I'd appreciate. So with that, Representative Banks, you're okay as a second on those friendly changes? Great. Any further discussion on the motion?
Well, Mr. Chairman,
Senator Case.
I'll just make the point that if we actually put this in the rules, it kind of reduces some of the power of the old tricky dogs in the legislature that know that you can do things that aren't in the rules.
I think everybody agrees with that, which might be good. With that, all in favor of the motion, if you'd say aye. Or raise your hand. Okay. All opposed say no.
No.
Okay, I think that's a 5-1 request to put on the management council agenda, a potential rule for being able to enroll a bill at the majority request of the body. Great. Anything else on this topic? Legislative process, procedures, and session issues. Any public comment? Make sure there's nobody else on Zoom. Just wanted to jump in. Seeing none. Any other public comment? Seeing none. We'll close this section, and we're just a little behind 2:30. But at this point, we would like to jump into the Capital Interpretive Exhibits and Wayfinding Subcommittee update. If you haven't seen the new committee rooms downstairs, there's very large gold seals on the walls. I found out last week. And flags, so they're looking snazzy down in the committee rooms. We still have pictures of Hat Creek apparently in this room. But with that, we'd be happy to welcome our state auditor and our very own Chairman Landon from the Senate to present to the committee today. I think because I introduced you, 14 people in the room left. I don't know why that is, but I guess we'll let the room clear for just a second. It means you're not going to have any testimony against you, is what that appears. So with that and the room being cleared out, besides 4 of us now, go ahead, Senator Landon, floor is yours.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the invitation. Very happy to be sitting beside the co-chairman of this subcommittee, which has worked this past 3 years, Auditor Racines. It's been a pleasure to work with her. But before I go any further, I also want to just tip the Stetson hat to the entire subcommittee, which has put in countless hours up to this point. We're reaching a pretty exciting stage, which is the culmination of all of that effort over the past 2 or 3 years. And we had several ex officio members, Mr. Chairman, that represented agencies in our state government, from tourism to the state museum to ANI to so many ex officio members from the Department of Education. We really had a great group. Representative Sherwood and Representative Nicholas were there with me, and Auditor Racines and her executive crew included Treasurer Meyer, who was there all the way through. And at this point, Superintendent Dagenfelder is also on that group. So I wanted to just remind everyone that it was a pretty collective effort. And I think from the word go, the idea was to make sure that that the executive branch and the legislative branch work together on behalf of the State Building Commission. And so we are a subcommittee of the State Building Commission. So that's a few of my comments to get started. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to stop by. Madam Co-Chairman?
Thanks, Senator Landon. Yes, thank you for the invitation and the ability to provide this update. As the Senator said, this subcommittee has really been intensive and broad-based, and like he mentioned, some of the staff from, we had folks from tourism and the museum and whatnot have really, and Department of Education to make sure we're hitting standards and whatnot, have been really, really invaluable. We've had about 25 meetings. It's been heavy. We've had a little break over the summer as they're actually fabricating and installing, as you might notice if you've been over to the Hirschler. But it has not been, as you know, picking the colors of the curtains is an intensive process. So we have a pretty extensive PowerPoint that has been shared with the committee. We can go through that as fast or as slow as you want. I think given the day you've had already, we would take a pretty high level at that, but always happy to delve in and answer any more detailed questions as we go through. Big picture, a very, very big picture of this project, I think of it as a couple different tracks. One of those being wayfinding and signage, which we all know is desperately needed on this entire grounds. So that's literally signs telling you where to go and what's in what building. The other track I think of is the interpretive exhibits, which are going to be panels that talk about the stories of Wyoming that we want to tell and that we have felt are most important to feature in these spaces. And then one sort of add-on, which I'll talk about a little bit, that came from a little bit of a legislative initiative, little bit of scope creep, but not necessarily in a bad way, has been the acoustics function has sort of been wrapped into this project. As you know, that's been a pretty solid discussion that is much desired by everyone who is anyone. And so that's been sort of another component of this project. All of those three tracks have sort of moved down, are moving along at different time periods. So really quickly, you can see right now we are in September. They are actively working on fabrication and site work for both signage and wayfinding, and then the static exhibits that are going to be coming in. More detailed, and like I said, I'm going to go through this really quickly. More detailed to come is going to be the digital portion of some of the interpretive exhibits. That's going to be things like a constitutional interactive. If you recall, there was a separate call out in the budget bill for that. And also the civics lab, which is down at the end of the hall to build that out and develop that.
For students, yeah.
Yeah. This is just an example, and what you're going to see with these wayfinding signs is we've really mirrored what the building is telling us. So, oh my gosh, and Wendy brought show and tell, which is so great. What you're going to see is here in the Capitol, it's going to be, it's going to match the building a lot more. Yeah, they're heavy. Yeah, it's going to be tooled bronze and be really appropriate for these spaces. And then as you see us move over to the extension and then up through the Hirschler buildings, it's going to be more acrylic and match those spaces. So we've really tried to carry through what the legislature has done in these spaces to the wayfinding and signage. A few more examples up on the screen of what some indoor and outdoor signs are going to look like in these spaces. And again, tell us to slow down, but otherwise I'm going to kind of rock and roll through this.
You know, and Madam Chairman, just real quickly to interject, and then I'll let you continue on. I forgot to mention, I'm sure the committee is aware that we have presented to the SBC. We've also presented to the Management Council, which has, through two or three different stages, has given thumbs up and votes approval for all of these. And so on we go, and back to you, Madam Co-Chairman.
Yep. Moving through, here's a few examples of what the static exhibits are going to look like. And all of you online, just know they're really fabulous, these samples that we have here. So these static exhibits are going to exist in multiple places throughout the building and feature different, like I said, different stories about Wyoming. A big one of those is going to be suffrage. What's shown on the screen now is there's going to be a panel outside of each elected official's office that is going to talk about the duties of the office and also feature a historical, for example, auditor, you know, someone who did something particularly outstanding. A concept that came to light, and throughout this whole project, the story that continues to bubble to the top, certainly not the only one we're telling, is that of suffrage in our state. And so this wing of the first floor of the Capitol is going to be Suffrage Hall. So that's where we really feature telling that story. And going off of recommendations and feedback for these rooms are going to be branded as, and I apologize, I think it went too fast. I don't remember what this one's gonna be called, but they're each going to feature a prominent suffragist and have some information about that individual person. There we go. So we have Esther Hobart Morris, Nellie Taylor Ross, and then Amelia Simons Post are going to be these rooms here. One of the other features that this project has taken on is really fleshing out seals and flags in the public meeting rooms. There's a few meeting rooms like that already had flags, but that's something we heard from quite a few legislators, that particularly those meeting rooms in the extension were they're lovely and they're nice and they're functional, but they maybe didn't have the same level of gravity that some of these others did. So those will have the seals and the flags in them as well.
And by the way, Mr. Chairman, one of the reasons that this room does not have one of the beautiful seals of the great state of Wyoming is that we have to be very careful with this historical art that exists in 110 and 113. Everyone is, I think, pretty fully aware of their value, but they will be very well taken care of. And these are the last two rooms then that would be adorned with the Great Seal.
And as you mentioned, you can go down, I think at least in one of the meeting rooms, or do they have them in all of them? The seal has been installed in the meeting rooms down there. Great. So this is some more examples of what some of these static panels are going to look like. And just for everyone's comfort, I mean, these wall, like this one shown is a wall mounted specimen. This is not gonna go on the first floor. This application is more for the garden level where that feels appropriate. We don't wanna take away from this space. That's why in spaces like the first floor here, you're gonna see those it's a statics exhibit, but it's a mobile panel that can be moved and doesn't take away from the building. This is an example of a reader rail that would be utilized, for example, up on the very third floor. On the Capitol grounds, we're also going to have additional interpretation. As you know, we have some pretty great art pieces out there that we don't say a whole lot about. So there's going to be some interpretation of the Spirit of Wyoming and a few of the other statuary that are on the grounds. So public meeting rooms, this is the 6 downstairs. We went through some iterations of how to brand these differently or give them a little more color than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And where the committee landed on was different drainages of the state.
Well, that's interesting, Mr. Chairman. We had several meetings of discussion, but that's kind of the iconic. There's a lot of headwaters and a lot of our civilization began and still resides in these drainages. And we just felt like those rooms deserved a little bit more recognition for what takes place there. And now I think you may hear, for example, we're going to meet down in the Belle Fourche room, number 5. We'll still have the numbers on those rooms, and so there'll be some cross-reference there, but pretty iconic river drainages coming out of Wyoming and playing a big role in everything that takes place in our state. So we're kind of excited about that.
And Mr. Chairman, I know you know how difficult it is to name things after places or people. So we like this idea because it wraps in the entire state.
Can I ask
oh, go ahead.
oddly why they're just not rivers? Why are they, we say they're drainage basins? I mean, one sounds a little more majestic. I don't know, a drainage basin sounds a little, yeah. We could just call them the Wind and the Grain and the Platte, but however you want to go about it, it does seem odd to call them drainage rooms instead of rivers.
Well, Mr., could you back up to the,
They don't say the word drainage on them? They won't? Good.
I was gonna say, I was like, I don't think it has the word drainage on the door, and if it does, we should change.
But it does have the word basin, I guess.
Yes, it does have the word basin. And again, I think if we limited it to river, then we're talking about one specific area where we want to kind of capture that whole area of the state.
And by the way, I think the co-chairman will get to this, but another exciting piece of this is that each of these will have some artwork in them that will represent that part of the state of Wyoming. So you'll have that coming up, some imagery that we can show you here in a minute. We're very excited about that as well. So.
Right. Yes, and again, a lot of that information came through the Water Development Office. Those are the 6 major drainages. And as we all know, water is everything. If you look on that on the right there, that is a rendering of how the finished room will look. As the senator mentioned, there will be photographic artwork in each of those rooms that are going to represent that area of the state or that drainage.
This might be a good point, Madam Co-Chairman, just to tag team along with you. Mr. Chairman, we had so much incredible input from the Wyoming Historical Society and from the Game and Fish and from photographers all across the state and the region. So I don't want to get through the entire day without recognizing that there's been so many players in this. But some of these images are absolutely spectacular, and I think it's going to add so much to our efforts and to anyone visiting the state capitol. So.
Let me double check. Are these on loan, or have we commissioned these, or these are in-house? Where are the pictures and paintings coming? Are they paintings? Are they prints?
Mr. Chairman, they're photographs, and I'll have Wendy will tell me if I say the wrong thing, but I think they're coming up from a variety of sources. A lot of them are little to no cost for the actual use of the photo. Adding the art in there it's not free, but I would say in the scope of the project, it's not a significant chunk of that, because again, a lot of these photographs are folks that are looking to have their photography displayed.
And by the way, we really appreciate the backing of Wendy and Rihanna, who have been invaluable, of course. Our staff, we can't do this work without our staff. But Wendy reminded me that we have secured the rights to all of these photographs, and so they're good in perpetuity.
Mr. Chairman?
Yep, go ahead, Senator Larson.
Thank you. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Wind River includes the Bighorn. And is there any chance of changing that to the Wind Bighorn River Basin? Has there been any discussion on that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Larson, that's a really great question, and I believe we actually had a very specific discussion on that and went with Wind River. What? Yeah, go for it, go for it.
More testimony coming.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, as a Bighorn Basin gal, I was sorely disappointed in the Wind River, not / Bighorn, but all kidding aside, it is kind of a mouthful. You're correct. The basin's name is Wind Bighorn because the Wind River becomes the Bighorn. But to try to keep these names tight on the actual door itself, the subcommittee elected to go with Wind River Room. And then there's a half-wall panel in each of these rooms. Part of the idea of describing a whole river basin is those 6 rooms then feature kind of the iconic landscapes from around that region. And there's a half-wall panel that is forthcoming that will explain kind of what the major rivers are, mountains, cultural sites, historic sites in that area. And in each of these, the half-wall panel will explain the rivers in the river basin. And we have reviewed the Wind River Bighorn, and it does explain that the Wind River originates as such, and it becomes the Bighorn River when they meet, or at the Wedding of the Waters is where the name changes. So there's some nice text there to kind of describe that whole unique circumstance for that room.
Mr. Chairman, I hear what she's saying. I would still request it be changed, but probably out of my hands. Thanks.
Representative Yin, someone?
Mr. Chairman, in one of the slides, there were actually 3 different basins that have 2 major rivers in it. And so it seems like they did that for all of the basins. So the Snake Salt is a basin, Wind, Bighorn, and then Powder and Tongue. It sounds like they just simplified it to not overdo the rivers.
Struggling to hear the representative.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. He was saying there's quite a few of the basins that had A/B, and we went with one. Senator Larson, I don't know if that's any comfort, but you might not be the only person that's offended, I guess, is my point.
Moving on.
Okay, moving on, the Capitol Auditorium, that's the big one down at the very north end. Whereas the 6 public meeting rooms feature areas of the state, that auditorium is going to be wildlife. And so a few selected images up on the screen. And I believe that we're missing all sorts of shout outs, but I believe that Game and Fish was very helpful in guiding us and getting us some really stellar photos.
What's in the book and online on this presentation, these are the photos that are going up in the rooms?
Yes.
Okay.
Through a long and painful process, we have gotten there.
They're impressive.
Mr. Chairman, you don't want to get on a committee that selects paint colors or window shades, but
Building colors
that's where we've been, yeah.
bricks?
Yeah, so it's been a challenge, but it's been a great challenge. It's been a good experience. So now we have conference rooms too, Madam Chairman.
So when we talk about these conference rooms, these are the, again, super functional, super useful, but exceptionally beige rooms that get a lot of heavy use during the session. For example, we know it as 53, 54. That's where a lot of the legislative luncheons are had. Then there's also several other rooms that this committee may or may not use that are off of that hallway, but the executive branch uses those quite a bit for various meetings throughout the year. They are going to feature, that's a before picture just for the record on the right, but they are going to feature graphic panels on the walls as well. Yeah.
And you'll notice, Mr. Chairman, the Indian paintbrush, the meadowlark, the buffalo, pretty iconic images, and the cottonwoods.
Yeah, so those meetings are going to be our state symbols. And just a comment, these full wall applications, we saw some of them in the Hirschler building and some here. They're a really cost-effective way to add a lot of punch and really raise the level in some of these, again, really functional, but very beige basement rooms where we have meetings that go for hours sometimes, so. So I'll go into a couple of the specific interpretive exhibits. One of those is going to be a staged vault. As you know, the vaults are a very popular feature, and please, Senator, jump in whenever, but there's going to be one of the vault is going to be staged with things that might have been in there and interesting facts and tidbits. So that is a page about how that might look. In the garden level, there's also going to be an architectural vitrine. Vitrine is one of the many fancy words I have learned serving on this committee. But a lot of the features down in that garden level is going to be about the actual architecture. We're going to feature the Capitol caretaker. And again, I know we're speeding through this. Tell us to stop. We understand it's been a long day. And then some of the digital exhibits and wayfindings. This is something where we're going to be using some of the existing structures and have an electronic directory to the building and to meetings within. So this is an example of how that will look on the screen, where you're going to be able to find where you're going, look up meetings, look up where things are. One overarching, and look up your government officials like that.
That's a startling image.
Kind-looking gentleman.
I'm sorry about that. That's got to be tough to look at.
Or her.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, of course, everything, the legislature already has a great website, so that will be duplicated on there as well. This is a digital timeline, and that's going to be down in the garden level on the west side. And talk about the history of essentially where we've been, how we've got here, and feature interesting facts throughout the last 150, 160 years. The dome drone, super cool, big impact, and I think this is going to be really cool for, again, relatively effective cost. This filming was done, I believe, in conjunction with a project through NCSL. So they came in and did the filming, and as you all know, everybody wants to go up into the dome. And nobody, that for 100 different reasons, it's not a great idea, or it's not accessible to a lot of people, just given that it's a little bit dangerous, it's very steep.
It's just not going to be realistic.
The dome drone essentially has flown a drone up into this space so that anybody can see and then navigate their way around that and look at some of those historic signatures, look out the window. Is it the same as going up there? No, but it's way better than not getting to see anything. And we think that's going to be a really exciting piece. And that will also be featured on any of those electronic kiosks throughout the building. We would love to show you the actual video from the dome drone, but we've tried to do that in other meetings, and it's technology always gets in the way.
It's a little bit heavy to load and to play for you, so.
We talked a little bit about the Constitution Interactive. This is something that I've been really passionate about, and I think a lot of members of the House and Senate have been as well, that our Constitution is just extremely special and unique, and really have an opportunity to put that on display and have that be explorable in a dynamic format. That display is going to be in the historic Supreme Court room. Portraits of History, this one, and as we've gone along, just again, big picture statement, we have gone from things that are that are decided and done and pretty concrete, like the wayfinding. We're getting into things where we're still fine tuning a little bit, so I apologize if I don't totally know what I'm talking about or I sound like that. The Portraits of History is going to be another interactive exhibit where visitors have the opportunity to interact with and hear stories from a digital picture from historical Wyoming figures, whether that be governors or suffragists or other prominent, notorious folks. And the civics lab, again, this is the, not that it's completely unrefined, but this is the least refined part of the project so far. This is down at the north end of the hall. And I believe this was modeled a little bit, or some of the inspiration was taken from the Judicial Learning Center over at the Supreme Court. There's long been a desire to have something similar over here that teaches about the legislative and executive branches. So this is going to be a very centric area where children of all ages can go and have interactive exhibits, both digital and analog interactive exhibits to learn about specific features of civic participation in the government. Acoustics update, which I apologize, I don't know if I have a great acoustics update other than we are moving on it. That's been funded by the legislature already, and we are looking at extensive options to try to pinpoint the problem areas, which probably everybody knows where those are. The floors are problematic. These two rooms are highly problematic, and then JC is one of the most problematic rooms. So that's where we're focusing and triaging and looking at some options, balancing what will be effective with how we affect the building. One of the most interesting things, I think I was concerned, and many folks have been concerned that, we can't possibly touch, the ceilings or anything or that sort of thing. I believe it was construction management came across documents, legislative documents, trying to commission ways to improve the acoustics in the Capitol in the year of 1918. So in other words, some of the things that we're looking at are not historically inaccurate to say, and the legislature has had trouble hearing in this building for over 100 years and have been trying to take action on it.
So that's so great of the co-chairman to bring that up, Mr. Chairman, because to back up a little bit, your committee obviously was very supportive of the idea and helped to push through the appropriation that allowed for us to do some things in the building that I think will really help. Some good consultants have been brought on board, and they've done a great job of kind of outlining a tiered approach to some of the most difficult spots in the building and then continue on from there. Already, there's been an upgrade into the system that we're speaking on right here. So work is continuing, and I think a lot of that is going to help. But right after the turn of the last century, the legislature and the executive branch got together and said, look, we've got some problems in the building, and we've got to come up with ways to deal with it. And they started putting insulation in different spots throughout the building. So we're on the right path, and we're being very careful to take care of the historical relevance and significance of the rebuild of the Capitol. We think that the acoustic effort, though, is on track and is going to be very helpful.
So, Mr. Chairman, that was a lot of, that was us trying to distill 3 years of 3 years?
Yeah, it's been,
Of work into
been quite a bit.
half an hour, so I apologize if it felt a little disconnected, but we're happy to answer any detailed questions about the timeline or any of the individual projects.
Questions from the committee on the timeline? I know it's spelled out in there, but you're on time and on budget, I guess, is the overall question with the resources we gave. I mean, every time I come in the building, something else is new and it just keeps getting better, so.
Mr. Chairman, I think the questions and/or, I wouldn't even say complaints, I feel like some of the things I'm anecdotally hearing from legislators are, well, aren't you going to do this also, to some extent? So I think this is a presentation of what we have right now and the money we have right now, and that's taken care of.
So I think, Mr. Chairman, just as kind of a finishing thought, there's a couple of highlights that I think, that I feel the best about. And one is, of course, the wayfinding, and that it's so important that it's the people's house, and when the people get here, they need to be able to get to where they need to go. And I'm excited about the wayfinding effort. I think we've worked very hard on that front. It's going in now. It's already begun in the Hirschler building. That was, quite honestly, the Hirschler building may have needed wayfinding even worse than the building we're sitting in right here. And so I'm excited that maybe people will be able to find their way in the Hirschler building when this is all finished. Second thing that we didn't mention all day is the Capitol Gallery, and the area outside of the auditorium down in the connector link is now going to be a gallery, and very excited about that. I think that's going to be a gathering spot. It's going to be an intersection of the Capitol Square buildings. A lot of traffic comes through there. I think the opportunity for some traveling exhibits and things from throughout Wyoming will end up in the Capitol Gallery. I think it's going to be a real tremendous addition to this part of the world. And so we will stand down unless there's any other questions.
Any other questions, committee? Making sure all the security precautions and all the things behind the scenes are also being taken care of to protect, the infrastructure we're putting in, or exhibits, and there's the necessary security, cameras, insurances, all those things are in place or coming along as well. I'll take that as a yes, or if you hear anything, let me know. I just know we get a lot of expensive stuff, some artwork from around the state that comes in, and it's both great that I think we had a bunch of standing projects there last year just in the middle of the floor, which is great until someone slips, and just making sure we've covered all of our bases there. It's so great to get all those things, but making sure we protect them and give them back in the same, not better condition is important.
Well, and I think the hesitation in answering, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure that you're ever completely secure on anything and everything, but we have talked about that, and we are very hopeful, and we were provided, at least the State Museum and the Capitol were provided with someone who's going to be overseeing all of the work that we've described today, and helping us to keep it relevant and up to date and repaired and secured. So
I think I saw that announcement of a new hire. I was very excited on Facebook. The person who got it is very happy, and I think we're happy to have him back. So seeing no other questions from the committee online, no public comment being left in the room, no public comment online. Committee, anything else to come before us today, either in regards to wayfinding or any other facilities topics you'd like to pursue? Welcome back, Representative Banks. Nobody else jump back on? Not seeing any. LSO, we do have some research, and we might do either a Zoom or just an email information and ballot here in a couple months. And then we had some motions for Management Council, not scheduled when that meeting is yet, but we'll have those recommendations, and I'm sure Senator Case or I, or Representative Yin will present them, or Senator Office, to council at that time. Seeing nothing else, committee?
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Case, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry about this, but I sort of have one more question about a process issue.
Go ahead, Senator, now's the time.
All right, I didn't want to let it go and I should have brought it up earlier. But in terms of how the general file is made known to the public, I've heard grumbling about that. And I realize we're in an area where it's the majority floor leader's purview, of course. But in previous times, when we actually had the general file written on the front of the chambers, there was usually a today's action and tomorrow's actions, and it wasn't, nobody accepted that as hard and fast, but it gave an indication of what the plans were by the majority floor leader for the order of bills to be taken up in committee of the whole. It seems to me that we've moved away from that. I think people are trying to be accommodating, but with the electronic list, it doesn't seem that we're quite as rigorous about trying to get the public involved and giving the public a heads up as what the next day's floor actions might be. So I'm wondering if there's any way we could think about this more. And since we are going to have another meeting, I would ask that maybe we could discuss this as an agenda item at the next meeting, if that's acceptable to everybody.
I think that's agreeable, Senator Case. We can ask LSO to do some research. I've probably had at least 5 times per session, I have someone freaking out on me about what bill is on general file the next day, and I have to tell them, no, that's just numerical. Yeah, your bill didn't get dropped to the bottom, but it does seem like the last 2 years, more than I ever remember, the general file is just coming up purely numerical, where in the old days it was, you know, here's the next 15 that you can plan on. So, and
Yeah,
now,
Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chairman, I think it was very helpful when we had a planned list for the next day as well. And maybe that, I don't recall the way we did it when I was in the House exactly, but I believe it was the same. And you know, if people don't know when their bill's coming up, or if it, you know, it might be not be when they think it's coming up, it kind of blunts the public's ability to weigh in on it with us.
we'll throw that on the agenda.
Thanks.
Yep. Any other requests? And I guess if you do have any other members of the committee or members of the public listening, there's some issues that either we didn't address today or got you thinking about issues of how we can be more accountable, transparent, improve our processes, either internally or, you know, forward facing. Certainly let us know. Reach out to the chairman or LSO, and we can try to get either a half day or a full day agenda for our next meeting. With that, thank you all for being here today, some remotely, some in person. Enjoy the rest of your day. We will be